A deep, quiet feeling told Kato that this day would be different from all the others, though he could not yet understand why. It was not a feeling of fear, nor one of excitement, but a simple, profound awareness that hung in the cold air of his small room. The world outside the paper screens was still a deep, inky blue, a time that belonged to neither night nor morning. It was a space between breaths, and it was here that his day always began. As this journey begins, if you wish to share this calm with others, a gentle press of the like button is all that is needed. To continue these explorations, feel free to subscribe. There is no bell to ring, only peace to be found. He lay perfectly still upon his thin futon, listening. He did not need to open his eyes to know the world around him. He could feel the chill of the wooden floorboards through the thin mattress. He could hear the faint, whisper-soft rustle of the wind against the eaves of the great house. It was a sound he knew as well as his own breathing. Every sound, every silence, had a meaning in this place. The house itself was a living thing, and it was waking slowly. Far away, in the main wing, a floorboard gave a low groan. Perhaps it was a guard on his final patrol, or maybe the old wood of the house simply settling. Kato listened for the crickets, but their songs had faded with the deepest cold that comes just before the sun appears. Their silence was the true clock that told him it was time. Slowly, carefully, he pushed aside the thick blanket. The air was a shock of cold against his skin, but he did not flinch. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, and silent. To make a sound, to disturb the sleeping household of his master, Lord Ishikawa, was a failure. Silence was a form of respect. It was a form of service. He sat up, his bare feet finding the cool, smooth wood of the floor. He could see the faint outline of the small window, a pale grey square against the dark wall. He knew that soon a thin line of pale gold would appear at the base of the mountains in the east. He would be in the kitchen long before that light touched the roof of this house. His clothes were folded neatly beside his futon. A simple cotton kimono, dark and practical. He dressed in the near darkness, his hands finding every fold and tie from memory. The fabric was rough but clean. It was the uniform of his life, a second skin. He did not think about it. He simply acted. Once dressed, he began the process of folding his futon. He folded it with the same precision he would use to fold his master's finest silk kimono. Each edge had to be perfect, each corner sharp. The blanket was folded and placed on top. Then, with a smooth, practiced motion, he stored it in the small cupboard built into the wall. His room was now empty, a blank space. It was as if he was never there. This, too, was a part of the discipline. To leave no trace. To be present when needed, and invisible when not. He slid open the paper screen of his door. He did not pull it. He pressed it with the flats of his fingers, letting it glide along its wooden track without a whisper. The hallway beyond was a river of shadows. The air here was even colder, flowing from the central garden of the estate. He could smell the damp earth and the faint, clean scent of pine needles. His feet made no sound on the polished floorboards. He knew every board that might creak, every spot that was uneven. He moved like a ghost through the sleeping heart of the samurai's home. This was his world, a world of corridors and screens, of silent tasks and deep, unspoken rules. He was on his way to the kitchen, the true heart of the house. It was there that the rhythm of the day would be set. It all began with a single flame, a single measure of water, a single bowl of perfect white rice. The fate of the entire household, in some small way, rested upon these simple things. He passed the closed doors of other servants. He knew who slept behind each one. Old Otoha, the head cook, whose snores were a soft rumble like distant thunder. Young Hannah, the maid, who sometimes talked in her sleep, whispering about flowers. He felt a quiet connection to them, these other silent figures who kept the world of Lord Ishikawa turning. The feeling from when he first awoke returned to him, the sense that this day held something different. He pushed the thought away. His purpose was not to wonder, but to do. His purpose was to serve. The day would unfold as it was meant to. His role was to be ready, to be calm, and to perform his duties without flaw. He reached the end of the long corridor and turned towards the kitchens. The air grew heavier here, holding the ghosts of yesterday's meals, the faint smell of wood smoke and pickled vegetables. It was a comforting smell. It was the smell of purpose. Before he entered, he paused. He looked out through an open archway into the central garden. The sky was now a soft, bruised purple. The silhouettes of the carefully shaped pine trees stood against it like ink paintings. A single stone lantern, unlit, waited for the evening. The world was in perfect balance, held in the quiet moments before the light, and Kato, a humble servant, was a small but essential part of that balance. His day had begun. It would be a day like 100 others before it, a dance of duty and discipline. And yet, the quiet feeling remained. A single mysterious note in the silent symphony of the dawn. He took a deep breath of the cold, clean air, and then he stepped into the kitchen to begin his work. The first task was always the same: to bring light and warmth into the world, to start the fire. He moved towards the kamado, the large earthen stove that dominated the far wall. It was cold and silent, a sleeping giant. His task was to wake it gently. He did not rush. He did not make a single wasted motion. He was an artist, and his work was the day itself. The day was a blank scroll, and his duties were the ink and brush that would create the picture. He hoped, as he always did, that the picture would be one of peace and order. He reached for the flint and steel, ready to strike the first spark. The day was waiting. The unknown feeling was waiting, and he was ready for both. The kitchen was a cavern of shadows, its large space filled with the sleeping forms of pots and pans. Kato moved through the familiar landscape, his senses guiding him more than his eyes. He knew the exact location of the kindling box, the precise feel of the dry, splintery wood within it. His hands worked with a certainty that came from 1,000 repetitions. He laid the kindling inside the belly of the earthen stove. He built a small, airy structure, a little house for the flame to be born in. It was a quiet craft, one of the first he had ever learned. Old Otoha had taught him, her hands guiding his. She had told him that a fire that starts well will burn well all day. A rushed fire, she said, is a fire with no heart. With the kindling in place, he took the flint and steel. He held the small piece of flint in one hand, the steel striker in the other. He did not strike them together wildly. He brought them together with a controlled, precise motion. A single, sharp click echoed in the silent kitchen. A tiny orange spark bloomed in the darkness and fell onto the waiting piece of charcloth. He leaned in close. His breath held the spark glowed, a tiny ember in the vast darkness. He gently cupped it in his hands, transferring the cloth to the kind of thing. He blew on it, a long, slow, steady breath. Not a puff of air, but a gentle encouragement. He was not commanding the fire to live. He was inviting it. The spark caught. A tiny tongue of yellow flame licked at the edge of the kindling. It hesitated, then grew stronger. He added another small piece of wood, then another. He watched as the lights grew, pushing back the shadows. The warmth began to radiate outwards, a small circle of comfort in the cold room. The stove was waking up. With the fire established, his next task was the rice. The rice was more than food. It was the foundation of every meal, a symbol of life itself. To serve imperfect rice to Lord Ishikawa was unthinkable. It had to be washed, cooked, and steamed with absolute precision. He moved to the large wooden barrels that stood against the wall. He lifted the heavy lid of the rice barrel. The scent that rose from it was clean and sweet, the smell of the earth. He used a wooden measuring box, the masu, to scoop out the exact amount needed for the morning meal. Not a grain more, not a grain less. He carried the rice to a large wooden tub near the water basin. He poured fresh, cold water over the white grains. The water came from the estate's well, and it was clear and pure. He plunged his hands into the icy water, the cold a familiar sting. He began to wash the rice, his fingers moving in a slow, circular motion. He was not scrubbing the rice, he was polishing it. He let the grains roll and tumble against each other, the friction gently removing the outer layer of starch. The water turned a milky white. He worked without thought, his mind quiet. The rhythmic motion was a form of meditation. The sound of the water and the gentle scraping of the grains was the only music in the room. He drained the milky water and added fresh water. He repeated the process again and again. He would wash the rice until the water ran almost perfectly clear. This was the secret to fluffy, perfect rice. Patience. There was no way to rush it. Each step in the process had its own time, its own rhythm. To hurry was to ruin. As he worked, other sounds began to join his for. From the corridor, the soft shuffle of footsteps. Old Otoha had arrived. She did not speak as she entered, merely giving Kato a short nod. She moved to the fire, checking his work. She added a larger piece of wood, her movements slow and sure. She was the queen of this kitchen, and Kato was her loyal subject. Together, in the growing light, they began the symphony of the morning meal. Otoha started on the miso soup, the sharp, salty smell of the fermenting bean paste beginning to fill the air. Kato, having finished washing the rice, placed it in the heavy iron pot, the koma. He added the precise amount of water, measuring it with his finger. The water had to reach the first knuckle of his index finger when he touched the surface of the rice. It was an ancient measurement, one that never failed. He placed the heavy wooden lid on the pot and set it over the fire. Now, another kind of patience was required. He could not lift the lid to check. He had to listen. He had to know the sounds of the cooking rice. The sound of the first simmer, the sound of the rolling boil, the final, quiet steaming. It was a language he had learned over many years. While the rice cooked, he had other tasks. He went to the small pantry and fetched the pickled vegetables, the sukimono. He arranged them carefully on small, beautiful ceramic dishes. A few slices of bright yellow pickled radish, a small pile of deep purple eggplant, a single perfect pickled plum, the yumiboshi, in the center of its own small dish. The colors were as important as the taste. He could hear the rest of the household stirring now. More footsteps in the hallways, the sound of screens sliding open. The day was arriving. The sun was likely cresting the mountains, though its light had not yet reached the kitchen. The work here always preceded the sun. They prepared the way for the day. The feeling from the morning returned to him, that sense of deference. He looked at Otoha, who was tasting the miso soup with a small wooden spoon. Her face was a mask of concentration. Did she feel it too? He did not ask. Such questions were not his to voice. His role was to observe, to anticipate, and to act. The rice pot began to make a new sound, a gentle hissing as the last of the water was absorbed into the grains. The heat from the stove was strong now, filling the kitchen with a comforting warmth. Kato moved the pot from the direct flame to a cooler part of the stove. It would now steam in its own heat, the final, crucial step. He prepared the tray for Lord Ishikawa's meal. A lacquered wooden tray, polished until it shone like a dark mirror. He placed the small dishes on it in a precise arrangement. The bowl for the rice here. The bowl for the soup here. The pickles to the side. Everything had its place. The tray was a small map of a perfect meal. Otoha grilled a small piece of fish over the coals. The smell was clean and savory. When it was cooked, the skin crispy and the inside flaky, she placed it on its own dish. This completed the meal. Rice, soup, pickles, and fish. A simple, balanced, and perfect start to the day. The rice was ready. Kato knew it without looking. The sounds had stopped. The pot was silent, holding its treasure of steam and heat. He lifted the lid, and a cloud of fragrant steam billowed out, smelling of sweet, clean earth. He used a wet wooden paddle to gently fluff the rice, separating the grains without crushing them. It was perfect. Each grain was distinct, shiny, and tender. He filled his master's bowl, creating a gentle mound. Not too much, not too little. The final piece was in place. He looked at the tray. It was a work of art, an offering. It was a physical expression of his respect and his duty. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Whatever else this strange day might hold, he had completed this first, vital task without flaw. Now, it was time to serve his master. He lifted the tray, his hands steady, and walked out of the warm, fragrant kitchen into the cool, quiet corridors of the house. The day was truly beginning. Leaving the warmth of the kitchen behind, Kato entered the main part of the house. The air here was different. It was still and carried the scent of old wood, tatami mats, and the faint, almost unnoticeable fragrance of incense from the previous evening. The light was growing, a soft, grey illumination that filtered through the paper screens, turning the hallways into a gentle maze of light and shadow. His footsteps were silent on the polished floor. He carried the breakfast tray with a focused grace, his body balanced, his mind clear. He was a river flowing through a familiar landscape, his course set and unchanging. His destination was the living quarters of Lord Ishikawa, a place of quiet and aura. As he approached, he heard the faint rustle of silk. The master was awake. Kato paused before the final screen, listening. He needed to announce his presence without being disruptive. He knelt on the floor, placing the tray beside him for a moment. "My lord," he said, his voice just loud enough to be heard through the paper. "I have brought your morning meal." His voice was calm and even, showing no emotion. It was the voice of his station, a tool of his service. A moment of silence passed. Then, from within the room, a low voice answered, "Enter." The voice was deep and carried the weight of authority, but it was not harsh. Lord Ishikawa was a man of great discipline, and his voice reflected that. Kato placed his hands on the wooden frame of the sliding door. The fusema. He opened it just enough to enter, then slid it closed behind him. He moved in a kneeling position, a sign of deep respect. He did not look directly at his master. His eyes were kept lowered, focused on the tatami mats before him. The room was large and sparsely furnished. A low table sat in the center. A single scroll with a painting of a mountain hung in the alcove. The tokunama below it sat a simple vase with a single, elegant branch of a flowering plum. The room was a reflection of the man who lived in it, simple, strong, and with a hidden beauty. Lord Ishikawa sat at the low table, dressed in a simple but elegant kimono. He was staring out at the garden, which was visible through the open outer screens. He seemed lost in thought, his face calm and unreadable. Kato approached the table and, with fluid movements, placed the tray before his master. He arranged each dish, turning it so it was perfectly presented. The master gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, but did not speak. Kato bowed low, his forehead nearly touching the mat. He then retreated to the edge of the room, kneeling silently, ready to serve or to be dismissed. He waited. This was a part of his duty, to be a silent, watchful presence. After a few moments, Lord Ishikawa gestured with his hand. "You may attend to the room." It was the command Kato was waiting for. It meant his master was ready to begin his day. Kato bowed again and rose silently. His first task was to deal with the master's sleeping quarters, which were in an adjoining room. He slid open the screen that separated the two spaces and entered. This room was smaller, containing only the futon, neatly folded by the master himself upon waking, and a wooden pillow. Kato's job was to air the bedding. He carefully picked up the futon and the thick quilt. They were heavy, filled with cotton. He carried them to the ingawa, the narrow veranda that ran along the outside of the room. He draped them over a wooden railing, where the morning sun and the clean air would purify them. This simple act was believed to ward off illness and bad spirits. He returned to the sleeping room. He took a soft cloth and wiped down the wooden pillow. He then wiped the floor of the small cupboard where the bedding was stored. He checked the paper screens for any tears or smudges. He found a small hole near the bottom of one and made a mental note to have it repaired later in the day. Every detail mattered. The perfection of the master's environment was a reflection of the master's own inner state. It was Kato's job to ensure that reflection was flawless. Once the sleeping room was in order, he returned to the main room. Lord Ishikawa was still eating, his movements slow and deliberate. He ate in silence, focused completely on the meal. Kato began his work on the other side of the room, staying as quiet as possible. He slid open the large outer screens, the shoshi that faced the garden. The morning light flooded into the room, bringing with it the cool, fresh air. The garden was beautiful in the early light. The moss on the rocks was a vibrant green, and dew sparkled on the leaves of the maple trees. Raking that garden would be one of his tasks later in the day. He took a soft feather duster and began to clean. He dusted the wooden beams above, the frames of the fusuma, the top of the tokonoma alcove. He moved with a practiced economy of motion. He did not stir up dust, he collected it. His movements were a slow, careful dance. He paid special attention to the scroll painting. He did not touch the painting itself, but gently cleaned the silk borders and the wooden roller at the bottom. He knew this painting well. It had been in the master's family for generations. It was not just a decoration, it was a piece of his family's soul. He then took a soft, damp cloth and began to wipe the wooden floors of the veranda. He worked his way from one end to the other, his movements rhythmic and steady. He did not use soap, only clean water. The goal was not just to clean the wood, but to polish it. to bring out its natural grain and color. The house was fully awake now. He could hear the distant sounds of other servants at their work, the sweeping of brooms, the drawing of water, the low murmur of voices. The entire estate was a complex machine, and each person was a vital part of its smooth operation. Lord Ishikawa finished his meal. He placed his chopsticks neatly on the small ceramic rest. Kato noticed immediately. He moved to the table, knelt, and began to clear the dishes. He stacked them carefully on the tray, making no sound. The master finally spoke. "The air is sharp this morning," he said, not looking at Kato, but out at the garden. "There is a change coming. A change in the season." Kato paused for a moment. "Yes, my lord," he replied softly. "Autumn is near." His master's words seemed to connect with the strange feeling he had woken with. A change was coming. Perhaps it was only the season, or perhaps it was something more. He lifted the tray. "Will you be needing anything else, my lord?" Lord Ishikawa shook his head. "No, leave me. I will meditate for a time." Kato bowed deeply and backed out of the room, sliding the screen shut behind him. He carried the empty dishes back towards the kitchen. His mind was calm, but the master's words echoed within it. A change in the season. He felt it too. The day was still young, but it felt old, filled with a quiet weight he could not name. His duty, however, remained clear. There was still much to be done. The bedding to be brought in, the armor to be tended, the garden to be raked. The day would proceed, one simple, focused task at a time. That was the only way he knew. After returning the master's tray to the bustling warmth of the kitchen, Keizo's own morning meal was a simple and swift affair. The servants did not eat the same food as the master, nor did they eat with the same ceremony. Theirs was a meal of function, designed to provide energy for the long day ahead. He joined the other lower-ranking servants at a long wooden table in a smaller room off the main kitchen. The air was filled with the low murmur of conversation and the sound of chopsticks against ceramic bowls. There was a sense of community here, a shared purpose that was different from the silent formality of the main house. The meal was simple, a bowl of rice, though not of the same polished quality as the master's. A bowl of hot miso soup and a small dish of leftover pickled vegetables from the night before. It was nourishing and familiar. Kato ate quickly, but not greedily. He ate with the same mindfulness he applied to all his tasks. He listened to the quiet chatter around him. The stable hands spoke of a new horse that was proving difficult to train. Hannah, the young maid, spoke of a tear she had found in one of the mistress's kimonos. These were the small, important details that made up their world. The concerns were immediate and practical. Kato rarely spoke during these meals. He was known as a quiet one, an observer. He preferred to listen, to absorb the rhythms of the household. He learned more by listening than he ever could by talking. He learned who was worried, who was tired, who was content. This knowledge was useful. It helped him navigate the complex social world of the servants' quarters. He finished his meal and took his bowl to the washing area. He washed it himself, using coarse sand and cold water to scrub it clean. He then dried it with a rough cloth and placed it back on the shelf where it belonged. Everything had a place, and every person was responsible for their own things. His stomach was full, the warmth of the soup spreading through him. He was ready for the next phase of his day. One of his most important and trusted duties awaited him, tending to his master's armor. This was not a task given to just any servant. It required trust, skill, and a deep understanding of the samurai way. He left the lively kitchen and walked towards a small, separate building at the edge of the main house. This was the armory, a place where the tools of war were stored in times of peace. The building was cool and dark, with a clean, metallic smell mixed with the scent of leather and lacquer. He slid open the heavy wooden door and entered. The room was meticulously organized. Spears and halberds stood in racks against one wall. Bows hung from wooden pegs. In the center of the room, on a sturdy wooden stand, was Lord Ishikawa's suit of armor. It was a magnificent sight. It was not the garish, overly decorated armor of a young, boastful warrior. It was the practical, powerful armor of a seasoned leader. The plates were made of lacquered iron, connected by dark blue silk cords. The helmet was simple but elegant, with a fearsome mask or mempo attached. To Kato, the armor was not just a collection of metal and leather. It was a living thing. It held the spirit of his master and the spirits of his master's ancestors. It had seen battle. It had protected the man he served. To care for it was an act of profound loyalty. He bowed to the armor before he began his work. He then lit a single oil lamp, as the room had only one small window high in the wall. The gentle flame cast a warm, flickering light on the dark surfaces of the armor. He began by laying out a large, soft cloth on the floor. Then, piece by piece, he began to disassemble the armor. He knew the order perfectly. The shin guards, the thigh guards, the armored sleeves, the chest plate, the helmet. Each piece was untied and placed carefully on the cloth. His fingers moved with practiced ease, undoing the complex knots of the silk cords. He worked in complete silence. This was a meditative task, one that required his full attention. His mind could not wander. A single mistake, a single moment of carelessness could damage the armor or, even worse, disrespect its spirit. With the armor disassembled, his real work began. He took a small, soft piece of silk and began to polish the lacquered plates. He did not use wax or oil. He used only the soft cloth and the warmth of his own hands. He breathed on the surface, creating a small cloud of condensation, and then polished it away. He worked in small, circular motions, bringing the dark lacquer to a deep, lustrous shine. He examined every inch of the armor as he worked. He looked for any sign of rust, any crack in the lacquer, any fraying of the silk cords. The armor was a body, and he was its doctor, checking for any sign of illness or injury. Today, he found a small fray on one of the cords that connected the shoulder plates. It was minor, but he knew it needed to be addressed. To leave it would be to allow a small weakness to grow. He made a mental note to replace the cord before the day was over. He spent a long time on the helmet, the kabuto. It was the most important part of the armor, the part that protected the mind and the face of the warrior. He polished the iron bowl, then carefully cleaned the neck guard. He took extra care with the mask, the fearsome face that was designed to intimidate enemies. He cleaned it inside and out, making sure the leather lining was soft and supple. After polishing all the lacquered pieces, he turned his attention to the silk cords. He used a small, stiff brush to clean away any dust or dirt. He straightened each cord, making sure there were no tangles or twists. The cords were the veins of the armor, holding it all together. They had to be strong and flexible. Finally, he began the process of reassembling the armor on its stand. This was even more complex than taking it apart. Each cord had to be tied with a specific knot, with the perfect amount of tension. Too loose, and the plates would rattle and offer poor protection. Too tight, and the master would not be able to move freely. He tied each knot with a focused precision. His fingers danced across the silk, weaving the pieces back into a whole. It was like putting a puzzle together, a puzzle he knew by heart. As he worked, the form of the samurai warrior began to emerge again on the stand. It rose from the scattered pieces, powerful and imposing even when empty. When he tied the final knot on the helmet, he was finished. He stood back and looked at his work. The armor shone in the lamplight, a dark and beautiful thing. It looked ready for battle, ready to serve its master. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had fulfilled his duty. He had cared for this sacred object and prepared it for whatever the future might hold. He extinguished the lamp, plunging the room back into semi-darkness. He bowed once more to the armor, a silent promise of his continued loyalty. He then slid the heavy door closed, leaving the armor to stand its silent watch. The strange feeling of the morning was still with him, a quiet hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. Looking at the armor, he wondered if it too could feel the coming change in the season. He pushed the thought aside. There was work to be done in the sunlight. The garden was waiting. Kato's next task was one of great trust and responsibility. He was to attend to his master's suit of armor. This was not a simple cleaning job. It was a ritual, a form of communion with the soul of the warrior. The armor was more than a protective suit. It was a symbol of Lord Ishikawa's power, his history, and his duty. He made his way to a small, secure storehouse adjacent to the main residence. The air inside was cool and smelled of metal, leather, and polishing oil. It was a quiet, solemn place. In the center of the room, standing on a wooden frame, was the armor itself. It stood like a silent, hollow warrior, its presence filling the small space. Kato bowed to the armor before he approached. It was a sign of respect, not just for the object, but for the spirit of the samurai it represented. He had been taught that the armor holds the memories of its wearer and of the battles it has seen. He treated it with the reverence one would show an elder. He lit a single oil lamp, as the room was windowless. The flickering light danced across the lacquered iron plates, which were a deep, imposing black. The silk cords that bound the plates together were a rich, dark blue. It was a functional and beautiful piece of craftsmanship, designed for protection and mobility. He began by laying out a large, clean cloth on the wooden floor. Then, with movements that were both gentle and sure, he started to dismantle the armor, piece by piece. He started with the lower body, untying the shin guards, or sunyate. Then came the thigh guards, the heidate. He laid each piece carefully on the cloth. He worked his way up the body. The armored apron, the kusazuri, the large chest protector, the do, the shoulder guards, the sword, the armored sleeves, the coat. Each piece was connected by a complex system of knots and cords. Kato's fingers knew each knot by heart. He could have done it with his eyes closed. Finally, he removed the helmet, the kabuto. He held it in his hands for a moment. It was the heaviest and most important piece. It protected the head, the seat of the mind and spirit. Attached to it was the fearsome mask, the mempo, with its snarling lip and bristly moustache made of horsehair. It was designed to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy. With the armor completely disassembled and laid out on the cloth, the real work began. He had several tools laid out beside him: soft silk cloths, brushes of different sizes, a small container of fine ash powder, and a jar of special oil. He started with the lacquered plates. He took a soft, dry cloth and wiped away any dust. Then he took another cloth, slightly damp, and carefully cleaned each plate, both inside and out. He was looking for any cracks, chips, or signs of wear. The lacquer was the armor's primary defense against the rain and humidity, which could cause the iron beneath to rust. He found a small scratch on one of the shoulder plates. It was not deep, but it was a weakness. He made a mental note to report it to the master. It would need to be repaired by a skilled craftsman. His job was not to fix such damage, but to identify it. After cleaning the plates, he began the polishing process. He did not use a heavy wax. Instead, he used a technique that involved breathing onto the surface to create a film of moisture, and then polishing it with a perfectly clean, dry silk cloth. He worked in small, circular motions, his hands moving with a steady rhythm. The lacquer began to glow with a deep, liquid sheen, as if it were still wet. This process took a long time. He gave his full attention to each piece. His mind was focused entirely on the task at hand. The world outside the storehouse faded away. There was only him, the armor, and the soft sound of silk on lacquer. Next, he turned his attention to the metal parts that were not lacquered, such as the rim of the helmet. He used the fine ash powder to gently scour these parts, removing any hint of tarnish or rust. He then wiped them clean and applied a very thin layer of oil with a small cloth to protect them from the air. The most delicate part of the job was caring for the silk cords. Over time, the cords could become stiff or frayed. He used a small, soft brush to clean any dust from the intricate braids. He then carefully checked each cord for signs of wear. A broken cord in battle could be a fatal weakness. He found one cord on the left sleeve that was beginning to fray. It was his duty to replace it. He had a supply of new silk cord, dyed the exact same shade of blue. He carefully unlaced the old cord, taking note of the precise pattern of the lacing. Then, with a small bodkin, he began to thread the new cord through the holes in the iron plates. This was painstaking work. The lacing was tight and complex. His fingers had to be both strong and nimble. He followed the traditional pattern, ensuring that the new lacing matched the old perfectly. It was a silent, focused task that required immense patience. When he was finished, the new cord was indistinguishable from the others. The weakness had been repaired. The armor was whole again. Finally, he cleaned the leather lining inside the helmet and the mask. He used a special oil to keep the leather soft and to prevent it from cracking. He made sure the horsehair moustache on the mask was properly combed and arranged. With every piece cleaned, polished, and inspected, it was time to reassemble the armor on its stand. This was the reverse of the dismantling process, and it had to be done with the same care. He started from the bottom and worked his way up, tying each knot with precision. As he laced the chest piece and attached the sleeves, the armor began to take on its warrior form once again. It was as if he was bringing it back to life. He felt a deep connection to the object, a sense of shared purpose. He was the caretaker of this powerful symbol, and his careful work was a vital part of maintaining his master's strength. The last piece to go on was the helmet. He placed it carefully on the top of the stand, adjusting it so it sat perfectly straight. The fearsome mask stared out into the dim light of the storehouse. The armor was complete. It stood ready. Kato stood back and looked at his work. The armor gleamed. It looked powerful and alive. He had spent hours on this task, but he felt no fatigue. He felt only a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had done his duty well. He had served his master by serving his armor. He extinguished the lamp, and the room fell into darkness. with only a faint line of light showing under the door. He bowed one last time to the silent warrior in the center of the room. Then he slipped out, closing the heavy door behind him, leaving the armor to its watch. The sun was higher in the sky now. The middle of the day was approaching, and with it, new tasks. Leaving the quiet solitude of the armory, Kato stepped back into the bright light of the day. The air was warmer now, and the sounds of the estate were more active. He could hear the rhythmic thud of a mallet from the carpenter's shed and the distant whinny of a horse from the stables. His next duty would take him to the practice yard, the dojo, where his master honed his martial skills. The dojo was an open-sided building with a polished wooden floor and a heavy thatched roof. It was located at the back of the estate, surrounded by a simple gravel yard. This was where the physical side of the samurai way was perfected. It was a place of sweat, discipline, and constant repetition. Kato's role here was not one of action, but of quiet support. He was not a warrior, he was a servant, but his presence was essential. He was there to ensure his master could train without any distraction or interruption. He arrived before his master. He first went to a small well near the dojo and drew a bucket of fresh, cold water. He filled the wooden basin and placed it on a low bench, along with several clean, folded cotton towels. He also brought a ladle made of bamboo. This was for his master to drink or to splash on his face and neck during his training. Next, he inspected the dojo itself. He took a soft broom and swept the wooden floor, making sure there were no splinters or pebbles. A small, unnoticed object on the floor could cause a slip, an injury, or a fatal distraction in a real fight. The floor had to be perfect. He then checked the rack of practice weapons. There were several bokken wooden swords carved from heavy, dense oak. He checked each one for cracks or splinters. A broken bokken could be dangerous. He also checked the shinai, the bamboo practice swords used for sparring, making sure the leather bindings were tight. His preparations were complete just as Lord Ishikawa arrived. The master had changed from his formal kimono into a simple, loose-fitting training uniform. His expression was focused and intense. The calm, meditative man from the tea room was gone. In his place was the warrior. Lord Ishikawa did not acknowledge Kato with words, but with a slight nod. He walked to the center of the dojo, took a deep breath, and began his warm-up exercises. These were a series of slow, controlled stretches and movements designed to prepare the body for the explosive action to come. Kato retreated to the edge of the yard, kneeling in a formal seiza position on a small mat he had placed for himself. From here, he could see everything without being in the way. He was a silent witness, a part of the scenery. His job was to be invisible, yet completely aware. After his warm-up, Lord Ishikawa selected a heavy bokken from the rack. He held it in both hands, feeling its weight and balance. He closed his eyes for a moment, his body perfectly still. Then he began his kata. The kata were a series of choreographed movements, a dance of attack and defense against an imaginary opponent. But it was far more than a dance. Each movement was precise, powerful, and filled with lethal intent. The wooden sword cut through the air with a sharp, whistling sound. Lord Ishikawa moved with a grace that seemed impossible for a man of his size. His feet slid across the polished floor, his body turning and twisting. One moment he was lunging forward in a powerful strike, the next he was spinning away, evading an unseen blow. Kato watched, his eyes following every movement. He had seen these kata hundreds of times, but they still held a kind of magic for him. It was the physical expression of the discipline and focus that ruled his master's life. It was a visible form of the spirit that Kato served. The sun beat down on the yard, and soon sweat was glistening on his master's brow. Lord Ishikawa's breathing became deeper, but his movements never lost their precision. He moved from one kata to the next without a pause. His face was a mask of pure concentration. He was not in the dojo anymore. In his mind, he was on a battlefield, his life depending on every block and every strike. Kato remained perfectly still. He did not move a muscle. He did not let his attention wander. He was a guardian of his master's focus. If anyone approached the dojo, it was his job to intercept them silently and turn them away. This was a sacred time. After what seemed like an hour, Lord Ishikawa completed his final kata. He ended in a powerful stance, the tip of his wooden sword pointed forward, his body trembling slightly with exertion. He held the pose for a long moment, the imaginary enemy defeated. Then, slowly, he relaxed. He lowered the bokken and let out a long, deep breath. He walked over to the bench where Kato had placed the water. His face was flushed, and his training uniform was dark with sweat. He picked up the bamboo ladle, filled it with cold water, and drank deeply. He then poured another ladleful over his head and neck, the cool water providing instant relief. He used one of the clean towels to wipe his face and hands. He looked at Kato, and for the first time, a hint of a smile touched his lips. It was not a smile of amusement, but of satisfaction. The satisfaction of hard work done, of the body pushed to its limits. "The body is a tool," Lord Ishikawa said, his voice a little hoarse. "It must be kept sharp, just like a sword." Kato simply bowed his head in acknowledgement. He did not need to speak. The master then indicated that he was finished for the day. He placed the bokken back in its rack and left the dojo, walking back towards the main house to bathe and change. Kato's work was not yet over. He waited until his master was gone, and then he entered the dojo. He took a damp cloth and wiped down the floor where his master had been training, cleaning away the sweat and footprints. He wanted the dojo to be as clean and pure as it was before the training began. He collected the used towels and the water basin. He checked the bokken his master had used one more time, making sure it was not damaged. He put everything back in its proper place. He left the dojo in a state of perfect order, ready for the next day's training. As he walked back from the dojo, carrying the used towels, he felt the sun on his back. The strange feeling from the morning had faded during the intensity of the master's practice. But now, in the quiet aftermath, it returned. It was a low, persistent hum in the back of his mind. A change in the season, his master had said. Kato looked up at the clear blue sky. The sun was at its highest point. The day was half over. He wondered what the other half would bring. After the intensity of the morning's duties, the middle of the day brought a change of pace and scenery for Kato. Old Otoha, the head cook, needed several items from the Castletown market. This was a task that often fell to Kato, as he was known for his quickness, his discretion, and his honesty. He changed out of his indoor work clothes into a slightly more durable kimono and a pair of sturdy sandals. Otoha gave him a small cloth bag with a few coins tied inside and a list of what she needed. Fresh ginger, a special kind of seaweed from a particular merchant, and a new sharpening stone for the kitchen knives. Leaving the silent, ordered world of the samurai estate was like stepping into a different river. The main gate of the estate was a clear boundary. Inside was quiet, discipline, and predictability. Outside was the noisy, vibrant, and unpredictable world of the town. He walked down the wide, clean street where the other samurai residences were located. Here, the walls were high and the gates were imposing. The only sounds were the crunch of his sandals on the gravel and the chirping of birds in the trees that grew behind the walls. But as he got closer to the center of town, the atmosphere began to change. The streets became narrower and more crowded. The air filled with 100 different sounds and smells. He heard the shouts of merchants calling out their wares, the laughter of children playing, the rhythmic hammering of a blacksmith, and the rumble of wooden cart wheels on the hard-packed earth. The smells were even more powerful. The smoky scent of grilled fish from a food stall, the sweet smell of incense from a temple, the sharp tang of pickled vegetables in open barrels, and the earthy smell of horses and oxen. It was a storm of sensory information, but Kato moved through it with a calm purpose. He did not let himself be distracted. He kept his eyes lowered, not making eye contact with the people he passed. He was an extension of his master's household, and he had to conduct himself with a quiet dignity. He was in this world, but not entirely of it. His first stop was the stall of the seaweed merchant. It was a small shop, its front open to the street, with large baskets of dried seaweed of all kinds. The old woman who ran the stall recognized him and gave him a toothless smile. "Ah, a servant from the Ishikawa estate," she said, her voice raspy. "Your cook has a taste for only the best kombu. I have a new shipment, fresh from the coast." She showed him the dark, thick strips of dried kelp. Kato examined it closely, as Otoha had taught him. He checked its color, its thickness, and its scent. It had a clean, salty smell of the deep ocean. It was of high quality. He nodded, and the old woman weighed out the amount he needed, wrapping it carefully in a piece of bamboo leaf. He paid her the exact amount, bowed his head in thanks, and continued on his way. He navigated the crowded street with ease, stepping around a group of chattering women, a pair of rough-looking laborers, and a monk in saffron robes who was chanting for alms. His next stop was the shop of a tool maker to buy the sharpening stone. This shop was tucked away in a small side alley. Inside, it was dark and smelled of metal and oil. The shopkeeper was a large, muscular man with soot-stained hands. He was busy at his forge, but he stopped his work to serve Kato. Kato explained what he needed, and the man nodded. He showed Kato several different stones, explaining the quality of each one. Kato chose a fine-grained water stone, one that would put a razor-sharp edge on the kitchen knives. He knew Otoha would be pleased. He paid the man and wrapped the heavy stone in a piece of cloth to protect it. His final task was to buy the ginger. He went to the open-air market, a bustling square filled with farmers and vendors selling fresh produce. The colors were amazing. Piles of green vegetables, bright red peppers, deep purple eggplants, and mounds of white radishes. He found a farmer selling fresh ginger root. The roots were plump and had a sharp, spicy fragrance. He picked out a few good pieces, haggling politely with the farmer over the price. This was an expected part of the process. They settled on a fair price, and Kato added the ginger to his bag. With all his tasks completed, he began the journey back to the estate. As he walked, he allowed himself to observe the town a little more closely. He saw a group of samurai, their two swords marking them clearly, walking with a confident swagger. He saw merchants using an abacus to calculate their sales. He saw a mother comforting a crying child. It was a world of endless small dramas, of life being lived in all its messy, vibrant detail. It was so different from the world within the walls of his master's home. There, life was a carefully composed painting. Here, it was a chaotic, unfolding scroll, He felt a strange sense of being an outsider in both places. He was a servant in the samurai world, and he was an emissary from that world when he was in the town. He existed in the space between. As he was nearing the quieter streets of the samurai district, he saw something that caught his attention. A man was posting a notice on a public message board. Kato could not read the complex characters, but he could see the official crest at the top of the document. Several other people were gathering around, whispering to each other with worried expressions. Kato did not stop. It was not his place to inquire about official business, but the image of the worried faces stayed with him. It added to the quiet, unsettled feeling that had been with him all day. The feeling of change. The town was a living creature, and it seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. He reached the gate of the Ishikawa estate and bowed to the guards, who recognized him and let him pass. As the heavy wooden gate closed behind him, the noise and smells of the town were cut off. He was back in the world of silence and order. He took a deep breath, the air here cleaner and scented with pine. He had completed his errands successfully. He felt the weight of the sharpening stone in his bag. It was a solid, real thing. He focused on that. He would deliver the items to the kitchen, and then he would move on to his next task. The day was marching forward, and he would march with it, one step at a time. No matter what strange feelings the world stirred within him. Upon his return to the estate, Kato delivered the goods from town to a pleased Otoha in the kitchen. The sharpening stone was met with a grunt of approval, the highest form of praise the old cook ever gave. With his midday errands complete, Kato moved on to a task that was, in many ways, the opposite of the chaotic energy of the town. He was to tend the Zen garden. The garden was not a place of colorful flowers or lush greenery. It was a space for contemplation, a miniature landscape designed to calm the mind and inspire reflection. It was located in a courtyard, visible from the master's private quarters and the main reception room. Its perfection was of the utmost importance. The garden consisted of a large, rectangular expanse of fine, white gravel. A few carefully chosen rocks of different sizes and shapes were arranged within the gravel, like islands in a vast, calm sea. Along the edge of the garden grew a carpet of thick, green moss and a single, ancient pine tree. Its branches, twisted and shaped by years of careful pruning, stood in one corner. Kato's primary tool was a wooden rake with long, thin tines. His task was to rake the gravel into patterns of perfect, straight lines and gentle, flowing curves that represented waves or ripples in water. This was not a task of brute force. It was an art form. A moving meditation. He began by removing his sandals and stepping onto the narrow stone path that bordered the garden. He took a few moments to simply stand and observe. He looked at the way the light fell on the rocks. He noticed a few fallen pine needles on the white gravel. He quieted his mind, letting go of the noise of the town and the worries of the household. He started in the far corner, working his way backwards so he would not leave footprints in the raked gravel. He held the rake with a light but firm grip. His first strokes were long and straight, creating a foundation of parallel lines. He pulled the rake towards him with a slow, steady motion. His whole body was involved in the movement, from his feet planted firmly on the path to his shoulders and arms guiding the rake. The sound of the tines scraping against the gravel was the only sound in the courtyard. It was a soft, rhythmic shushing sound, like the tide receding on a distant shore. The sound was calming, and Kato fell into its rhythm. His mind began to empty. He did not think about the past or the future. He thought only of the line he was creating in this exact moment. It had to be perfectly straight, perfectly parallel to the one before it. His focus narrowed until the entire world was just him, the rake, and the white gravel. After creating the base of straight lines, he began to work around the large rocks. Here, the art was more complex. He raked the gravel into concentric circles around the base of each rock, as if the rock had been dropped into a calm pond, creating ripples that spread outwards. The lines had to be smooth and unbroken, the transition from the straight lines of the open sea to the curved lines around the islands had to be natural and flowing. It took a great deal of skill and concentration. He had to adjust the pressure on the rake, the angle of his body, the speed of his movement. He worked with a quiet intensity. The sun was warm on his back. A gentle breeze rustled the needles of the old pine tree. A dragonfly with wings like stained glass hovered for a moment over one of the rocks, then zipped away. Kato noticed these things, but they did not break his concentration. They were simply part of the perfect, peaceful moment. As he raked, he thought about the nature of the garden. It was a paradox. It was a work of immense effort and control, yet its purpose was to create a feeling of natural, effortless peace. Every grain of gravel was in its proper place, yet it looked like a landscape untouched by human hands. It was a reflection of the samurai ideal, perfect discipline hidden beneath a calm and simple exterior. He reached the final section of the garden. He carefully raked the last few lines, ensuring they met the edge of the mossy border perfectly. He then slowly backed away, stepping off the stone path. He stood for a long time, looking at his finished work. The garden was transformed. It was a sea of tranquility. The straight lines gave a sense of order and vastness. The ripples around the rocks gave a sense of life and energy. The white gravel caught the afternoon sun, making the whole space seem to glow. It was clean, pure, and perfect. He felt a deep sense of peace. The strange, unsettling feeling that had followed him all day seemed to dissolve in the calm beauty of the garden. Here, there was only order. Here, there was only now. His work was not quite done. He knelt by the mossy border and began to pick out any small weeds or fallen leaves that had intruded on the perfect green carpet. His fingers moved delicately, ensuring he did not disturb the moss itself. He then went to the ancient pine tree. He examined its branches, looking for any dead needles or overgrown shoots. He had a small pair of shears, and he made a few precise cuts, shaping the tree according to the ancient principles of bonsai. He was not just cutting the tree, he was in a silent conversation with it, helping it to express its truest, most beautiful form. When he was finished, he gathered the few pine needles and leaves he had collected into a small basket. He left no trace of his work, only the work itself. He stood one last time at the edge of the garden, taking it all in. He knew that his master would soon be sitting on the veranda, looking out at this very scene. He hoped that the peace and order of the garden would bring peace and order to his master's mind. That was the ultimate purpose of his work. It was another form of service, another way of supporting the man he was bound to. The sun was beginning to dip towards the west. The shadows of the rocks were growing longer, stretching across the white gravel. The day was beginning its slow turn towards evening. Kato felt a sense of renewal. The garden had cleaned his mind, just as he had cleaned the garden. He was ready for the duties that the evening would bring. He bowed to the garden, a gesture of thanks, and walked away. leaving it to its silent, perfect beauty. As the afternoon sun softened and cast long shadows across the raked gravel of the garden, Kato knew it was time for another of his responsibilities. It was time to prepare for the tea ceremony. This was not simply making a beverage. It was a highly structured and spiritual ritual, a cornerstone of samurai culture. It was an art form that valued harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Lord Ishikawa often performed a small, private tea ceremony in the late afternoon to clear his mind after a day of training and duties. Kato's role was not to perform the ceremony itself. That was the role of the host, the master, but to prepare everything so perfectly that the ceremony could unfold without a single flaw. He went to the mizuya, a small preparation room adjacent to the tea room. This was his domain. The mizuya was a marvel of compact organization. Everything had its precise place on shelves and in small cupboards. The air smelled of clean water, bamboo, and faintly of green tea. His first step was to select the utensils, the dogu. Lord Ishikawa had a collection of beautiful and valuable tea bowls, water jars, and other implements. Kato knew that the master chose the utensils for each ceremony based on the season, the time of day, and even his own mood. Today, Kato selected a simple, rustic-looking tea bowl with a dark, uneven glaze. It was a style that evoked the coming of autumn, a feeling of quiet simplicity. He chose a bamboo tea scoop, the choshaku, carved by a famous master. He selected a bamboo whisk, the chasen, with fine, delicate tines. He also chose the natsume, a small lacquered container for the powdered green tea. Each item was a work of art in its own right. He brought the selected items to a low work table. His next task was to purify them. This was a physical and symbolic act of cleansing. He took a fukusa, a square of fine silk, folded it in a prescribed, elegant manner, and began to wipe each utensil. His movements were slow, deliberate, and full of grace. This was not like scrubbing a kitchen pot. It was a gesture of respect for the objects and for the ceremony to come. He handled each piece with extreme care. The tea bowl was hundreds of years old. To drop it would be an unimaginable disaster. He held it with both hands, feeling its weight and texture, admiring its simple beauty before placing it on a clean cloth. Once the utensils were prepared, he turned his attention to the water. The water for the tea ceremony was of critical importance. It had to be pure and fresh. He went to the estate's well and drew a bucket of cold, clear water. He brought it back to the mizuya and poured it into a large iron kettle, the koma. He then went to the tea room itself. It was a small, simple room with tatami, matte floors, and a low ceiling. The only decoration was a single scroll in the alcove, the tokonoma, and a small vase with a single autumn flower. Kato checked the room carefully, ensuring it was perfectly clean. In the center of the room was a sunken hearth. Kato carefully arranged charcoal in the hearth in a specific pattern designed to produce the perfect amount of heat with minimal smoke. He lit the charcoal, and soon a bed of glowing embers provided a gentle, steady warmth. He placed the iron kettle filled with water over the embers to heat. His final preparation was the tea itself. He took the lacquered natsume, he measured out the vibrant green tea powder, the matcha, and carefully sifted it through the fine mesh of the sieve. This was to remove any lumps and to make the tea light and airy, which would allow it to froth perfectly when whisked. He returned all the prepared utensils to the mizuya, arranging them on a tray in the exact order they would be needed. His work was now complete. Everything was ready for the master. The water was heating, the tools were purified, the tea was sifted, and the room was a haven of tranquility. He went to find Lord Ishikawa, who was meditating in his private quarters. Kato knelt outside the screen and announced softly, "My lord, the preparations for tea are complete." Lord Ishikawa opened his eyes and nodded. He rose and made his way to the tea room. Kato did not follow. His part in the ceremony was over. He had created the perfect stage. The play itself was for the master alone. Kato returned to the Mizuya, where he could hear the faint sounds from the tea room. He heard the gentle clink of the bamboo ladle on the iron kettle. He heard the soft, rhythmic sound of the whisk as his master prepared the tea. He could almost smell the fragrant, slightly bitter aroma of the matcha. He knew what was happening in the room. His master would be moving with the same focused, deliberate grace he had used in his sword practice. Each movement in the tea ceremony was a kata in itself. The way he held the bowl, the way he poured the water, the way he whisked the tea into a frothy emerald green liquid. It was all part of a moving meditation. Kato sat quietly in the Mizuya, waiting. He felt a sense of connection to the ritual. Even though he was not a part of it, he had enabled it. His careful, silent work was the foundation upon which the beautiful ceremony was built. It was a humble role, but a vital one. The strange, unsettling feeling of the day seemed very far away in this moment. The world of official notices and worried whispers could not penetrate the profound peace of the tea room. Here, in the quiet ritual, was an answer to the chaos of the world. The answer was to focus on the simple, beautiful things. To perform each action with your whole heart. To find harmony in a single cup of tea. After some time, he heard the sounds of the ceremony concluding. He waited until his master had left the tea room before he entered. He found the utensils used and cleaned. Lord Ishikawa always cleaned his own bowl and whisk after a private ceremony. It was part of the discipline. Kato's job was to put everything away. He carefully collected the precious utensils and returned them to the Mizuya. He cleaned the kettle and emptied the hearth of its ashes. He left the tea room exactly as he had found it, clean, empty, and peaceful. As he worked, he found a single drop of green tea that had fallen on the tatami mat. He took a clean, damp cloth and carefully blotted it up, leaving no trace. It was a small, insignificant detail, but to Kato, it was everything. His purpose was to maintain perfection, to erase the small imperfections, to create a world of seamless order for his master. This was his art. This was his service. The day was drawing to a close, and his duties continued. The quiet period after the tea ceremony was a time for small, focused tasks. The grand duties of the morning were complete, and the preparations for the evening had not yet begun. This in-between time was filled with the necessary, often overlooked, work of maintenance. It was Kato's job to attend to the small tiers, the dull edges, and the loose hinges of the household. He collected a small wooden box that contained his mending supplies. Inside were needles of various sizes, spools of silk and cotton thread in different colors, a block of beeswax for strengthening the thread, and a small, sharp pair of scissors. It was a simple kit, but with it, he could perform many small miracles of repair. He recalled the small tear that Hannah, the maid, had mentioned in one of the mistress's kimonos. He went to the sewing room, a quiet space shared by the female servants, and found the garment. It was a beautiful silk kimono, dyed with a delicate pattern of autumn leaves. The tear was small, near the hem, but if left unattended, It could easily grow. He sat on a cushion by the window, where the light was still good. He carefully examined the tear. It was a clean rip, which would make it easier to mend. He selected a silk thread that was the exact color of the fabric. He ran the thread over the block of beeswax, which made it stronger and less likely to tangle. He threaded the needle, his eyes sharp and his hands steady. Then he began to sew. He did not use large, clumsy stitches. He used a series of tiny, almost invisible stitches, following the weave of the fabric. This was a skill that required immense patience and a light touch. He was not just closing a hole. He was reweaving the fabric, making the damage disappear. As he worked, his mind settled into a state of calm focus. The world shrank to the point of his needle, the shimmer of the silk thread, and the feel of the fine fabric between his fingers. Each stitch was a small, deliberate action. Each stitch was a step towards making something whole again. He thought about how much of his life was about maintenance. Polishing armor to prevent rust, sweeping floors to prevent the build-up of dust, mending tears to prevent a garment from being ruined. It was a constant, quiet battle against decay and disorder. It was not glamorous work. There were no songs sung about a perfectly mended seam. But Cato knew it was important. It was the foundation of the elegant world his master inhabited. Without this constant, patient work, everything would slowly fall apart. He finished the seam, tied a tiny, secure knot on the inside of the fabric, and snipped the thread. He held the kimono up to the light. The tear was gone. The repair was so fine that he himself could barely see where it had been. He felt a quiet pride in his work. He had saved a beautiful thing from ruin. He folded the kimono carefully and set it aside to be returned to the mistress's chambers. His next task involved a different kind of mending. He had noticed earlier that the paper screen in his master's sleeping quarters had a small hole. He went to a storage room where supplies for house repairs were kept. He found a roll of fine rice paper, the same kind used for the screens, and a small pot of rice glue. He returned to his master's quarters. The rooms were empty now, the master likely engaged in study or conversation elsewhere in the estate. Cato worked quickly and quietly. He carefully cut a small patch of new paper, slightly larger than the whole. He feathered the edges of the patch by tearing them gently, which would help the patch blend in. He applied a tiny amount of the rice glue to the edges of the patch with a small brush. Then he carefully placed the patch over the hole from the inside of the screen, so it would be less visible from the main room. He pressed it gently with a soft cloth, smoothing out any wrinkles. The white glue would dry clear, and the patch would be almost unnoticeable. It was another small victory against the forces of decay. His final maintenance task of the afternoon was to sharpen a small utility knife from the kitchen that Otaha had complained was getting dull. He took the knife and the new sharpening stone he had bought in town to a quiet spot behind the kitchen. He sat on the ground and placed the water stone in front of him. He poured a little water on its surface. He held the knife in his right hand, his thumb on the flat of the blade. He placed the fingers of his left hand on the blade near the edge to guide it. He held the blade at a precise angle to the stone. The angle was everything. Too steep and the edge would be weak. Too shallow and it would not be sharp enough. He had learned the correct angle through years of practice, feeling it in his hands and wrists. He began to slide the blade across the wet stone, away from him. He used a smooth, steady pressure. The sound was a soft, gritty whisper, a song of steel and stone. He sharpened one side of the blade, then the other, maintaining the same angle, the same pressure, the same rhythm. He added more water to the stone as he worked, creating a fine paste of stone particles and steel. This slurry was what did the real work of polishing the edge to a razor sharpness. He could feel the edge of the blade changing under his fingers, becoming finer and keener. This task, like the sewing and the screen repair, was a form of meditation. It required his complete concentration. His mind could not wander. It was a conversation between him, the steel, and the stone. He was slowly, patiently, restoring the purpose of the knife. He was bringing back its edge. When he was satisfied, he wiped the blade clean and tested it. He took a piece of stray paper and held it up. The knife sliced through it with a satisfying whisper, leaving a perfectly clean cut. It needed no pressure at all. The knife was sharp again. He cleaned the sharpening stone and put it away carefully. He returned the newly sharpened knife to Otoha in the kitchen. She took it, tested the edge with her thumb, and gave him another one of her rare grunts of approval. The sun was low in the sky now, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. The day was ending. Kato felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. He had not done anything grand. He had not won any battles or composed any poems. But he had made the world around him a little more whole, a little more orderly, a little more functional. He had mended the small tears in the fabric of the day, and for him that was enough. As twilight began to settle over the estate, casting the garden in shades of deep blue and purple, Kato was engaged in one of his final outdoor tasks, sweeping the fallen leaves from the stone paths. He used a broom made of fine bamboo twigs, his movements rhythmic and efficient. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth and the distant smoke from evening cooking fires. He was focused on his work, his mind as quiet as the garden around him, when he heard a soft footstep on the veranda behind him. He turned and was surprised to see Lord Ishikawa standing there, watching him. It was unusual for the master to be here at this time, and even more unusual for him to be alone without a specific purpose. Kato immediately stopped his sweeping. He placed the broom aside and knelt on the path, bowing his head low. He waited in silence for his master to speak. To be addressed directly by the lord of the house, outside of a direct command, was a rare occurrence. "Kato?" Lord Ishikawa said. His voice was soft, not the commanding tone of the dojo, but the reflective tone of the tea room. "Stand up! Come here!" Kato rose and approached the veranda, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. He stood a few feet from his master, his hands clasped before him. He was ready to receive an order, a criticism, or an instruction. But Lord Ishikawa did not give an order. He was looking out at the sky, at the first star that had appeared in the deepening twilight. "The seasons turn without fail," he said, more to himself than to Kato. "There is a lesson in that, a lesson in acceptance." Kato remained silent. He did not know how to respond to such a statement. It was not his place to engage in philosophy with his master. His place was to listen. The master turned his gaze from the sky to the garden that Kato had so carefully raked just hours before. "You do good work," Lord Ishikawa said, his eyes tracing the perfect lines in the gravel. "There is discipline in your hands, a quiet spirit." Kato was taken aback by the direct praise. It was so unexpected that for a moment he did not know what to say. He finally managed a soft, "You are too kind, my lord. I only do my duty." Lord Ishikawa was silent for a long moment. He seemed to be studying Kato's face in the dim light. "Duty is the bone," the master said slowly. "But the spirit with which you perform the duty, that is the marrow. It is the part that gives life." He paused again, and Kato felt a strange tension in the air. The feeling from the morning, the sense of an unnamed change, returned with a sudden intensity. It was as if this strange, quiet conversation was the center of it. "There are matters unfolding beyond these walls," Lord Ishikawa continued, his voice low and serious. "Messages have come from the capital. The shogun has made a decision that will displease many. The winds of conflict are beginning to stir." Kato's heart beat a little faster. This was what he had sensed. The worried faces in the town, the official notice on the board. It was not just a change in the season, it was a change in the world of men. "I tell you this not to alarm you," his master said, his gaze sharp and direct. "I tell you this because in times of uncertainty, the small things become more important than ever. The order within these walls becomes a sanctuary against the chaos outside. The perfect bowl of rice, the polished armor, the peaceful garden, they are not trivialities. They are anchors. They are a statement that even when the world is in turmoil, we can still create a small space of harmony and control." He looked directly at Kato. "Your work is that anchor for me and for this household. Do you understand the weight of that?" Kato finally lifted his eyes and met his master's gaze. He saw no arrogance or pride in the master's eyes. He saw only a deep seriousness, and perhaps a hint of weariness. "Yes, my lord," Kato said, his voice clear and steady. "I understand." Lord Ishikawa seemed satisfied. He gave a slight nod. "Good. Continue with your duties. The world may change, but our purpose does not." With that, the master turned and walked back into the house, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. The conversation was over as suddenly as it had begun. Kato stood frozen for a long moment, the bamboo broom forgotten at his side. The master's words echoed in his mind. Your work is that anchor. He had always known his work was important for the smooth running of the house. But he had never considered it in this way. He had never thought of his simple, repetitive tasks as a form of defense against the chaos of the world. He looked at the garden, at the darkening sky, at the solid, silent house. He felt a new sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of his place. His role was not just to serve, but to protect. To protect the peace of this small world through his quiet, relentless attention to detail. The unsettling feeling that had been with him all day had finally been given a name. It was the wind of conflict. It was the uncertainty of the world beyond the gates. But now, it was no longer a vague, mysterious anxiety. It was a challenge. And his master had just given him the weapon with which to face it. His own humble daily work. He picked up his broom. The leaves were still there, waiting to be swept. The evening meal still needed to be prepared for. The lanterns still needed to be lit. His purpose had not changed, but it had deepened. He took a deep breath of the cool night air and began to sweep again. His movements once more calm, rhythmic, and full of a new, profound meaning. The unexpected conversation with his master still resonating in his mind, Kato returned to the kitchen. The atmosphere here had transformed. The bright, busy energy of the morning had been replaced by the warm, fragrant glow of the evening. Lanterns cast a soft, yellow light, and the main hearth fire crackled, warding off the chill of the coming night. Otoha was already in command, orchestrating the creation of the evening meal. This meal was typically more complex than breakfast. It would consist of several small courses, each designed to balance the others in flavor, texture, and appearance. Kato's new understanding of his duties as an anchor gave the familiar tasks a fresh weight. This was not just dinner. It was the creation of a moment of peace and stability at the end of a long day. His first task was to prepare the rice. Just as in the morning, this was a ritual of precision. He measured the grains, washed them until the water ran clear, and set the heavy iron pot over a carefully controlled fire. The steady rhythm of washing the rice helped to calm his thoughts after the intensity of his talk with Lord Ishikawa. While the rice cooked, Otoha directed him to prepare the vegetables. There was a large daikon radish that needed to be peeled and grated. Kato took the heavy white root and a sharp knife. He peeled it with long, smooth strokes, the white skin coming away in a single, continuous ribbon. He then took a fine grater made of shark skin, stretched over a wooden paddle, and began to grate the radish into a soft, white pile of snowy pulp. Next, he was given a basket of fresh spinach. He washed the leaves carefully, removing any trace of sand or grit. He then blanched them quickly in a pot of boiling water, just for a few seconds, to lock in their vibrant green color. He immediately plunged them into a basin of cold water to stop the cooking process. He then squeezed the water from the leaves and chopped them, preparing them for a dish of seasoned spinach with sesame seeds. He worked in harmony with Otoha and the other kitchen servants. There was little need for words. Everyone knew their role. A glance from Otoha, a small gesture of the hand, was enough to communicate what needed to be done next. One servant was grilling fish over the charcoal, its skin crackling and turning a golden brown. Another was simmering vegetables for a clear soup, the dashi broth filling the kitchen with a savory, oceanic aroma. Kato felt the kitchen as a single organism, each person a part of the whole, working together to create something beautiful and nourishing. This, he thought, was another example of the order that his master had spoken of. It was a small world of perfect cooperation, a defense against the selfish chaos of the outside world. He was tasked with preparing a small dish of simmered taro root. He peeled the small, round roots, their slimy texture making them difficult to handle, but he worked with a practiced hand. He simmered them in a broth of dashi soy sauce and sweet rice wine until they were perfectly tender, absorbing all the flavors of the liquid. The rice finished cooking, and he let it steam off the heat. He fluffed it with a wet paddle, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud. It was perfect. He began to fill the bowls for the master and his family. As he worked, he thought about the winds of conflict his master had mentioned. He imagined armies marching, banners flying, the clang of swords. It was a world so far removed from the peace of this kitchen. It was hard to believe that two worlds could exist at the same time. And yet, he realized, even the greatest lord, the most powerful warrior, needed to eat. Even in times of war, rice must be cooked, soup must be made. Perhaps the simple, essential tasks of life were the most important things of all. They were the threads that held the world together, even when it seemed to be tearing apart. He began to arrange the master's tray. It was more elaborate than the morning tray. There was the bowl of rice, the bowl of clear soup, and the main dish of grilled fish. Then there were the smaller dishes, the simmered taro, the seasoned spinach, and a small plate of pickles. He arranged them according to the strict principles of Japanese cuisine. The placement of each bowl, the combination of colors, the balance of shapes, it was all part of the aesthetic experience. The red of a pickled ginger slice against the green of the spinach. The dark square of the fish plate next to the round white of the rice bowl. It was a painting on a tray. When everything was ready, he lifted the tray. It felt heavier than usual, not in physical weight, but in significance. He was not just carrying food, He was carrying an anchor. He was delivering a moment of carefully constructed peace. He carried the tray through the quiet hallways of the house. The lanterns had all been lit, casting long, dancing shadows on the paper screens. The house felt safe and warm, a fortress against the coming night and the uncertain future. He served a meal in the same formal, silent manner as he had in the morning. Lord Ishikawa was seated with his wife and young son. They spoke in low, calm voices. The family meal was another ritual, another source of stability. Kato performed his duties flawlessly, moving like a ghost in the background, refilling a cup of tea, removing an empty dish. When the meal was over and he had cleared the trays, he returned to the kitchen. The servants were eating their own meal now, the leftovers from the master's table supplemented with more rice and soup. Kato joined them, eating his food with a new appreciation. He was tired from the long day, but he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had fulfilled his purpose. He had done his small part to hold the line against chaos, and he knew that tomorrow he would wake before the dawn and do it all again. That was his promise. That was his path. As the last vestiges of daylight faded from the sky, a different kind of light began to bloom throughout the estate. This was the hour of the Anden and the Chokin, the paper lanterns that would hold the darkness at bay. Lighting the lanterns was one of Kato's final and most peaceful duties of the day. It was a task that marked the official transition from the world of day to the world of night. He began in the service corridor, where the lanterns were stored during the day. He collected a long, thin stick of bamboo with a bit of smouldering rope at its end, which he had lit from the kitchen hearth. This would be his source of fire. He also carried a small pot of rapeseed oil and a funnel for refilling the lamps. His first stop was the main entrance. Here stood a large, impressive Anden, a stationary lantern made of a wooden frame and stretched paper. It was a symbol of welcome and status. Kato slid open the small door at its base, checked the oil level in the small ceramic dish, and trimmed the wick. He then touched the smouldering rope to the wick. A small, clean flame sprang to life. He closed the little door, and the light from the flame filled the paper shell. It cast a soft, warm, inviting glow on the polished wood of the entranceway. The light was not harsh or bright. It was gentle, alive. It seemed to breathe in the quiet air. The shadows it created were soft and deep, adding a sense of mystery and peace to the space. From the entrance, he began his journey through the house, a quiet lamplighter moving through the growing dusk. He moved along the Ingawa, the veranda that bordered the main rooms. Here, he lit the hanging lanterns, the choking that were suspended from the eaves. Each one had to be lowered, opened, its candle lit, and then raised again. The light from these lanterns spilled out onto the veranda and cast a gentle glow on the edge of the garden. The perfectly raked gravel now took on a new character, a sea of silver under the soft light. The great rocks became dark, sleeping beasts. The garden at night was a different world, more mysterious and magical than the garden in the day. He moved with a steady, unhurried pace. His path was a familiar dance. He knew which lanterns tended to be low on oil, which wicks needed the most trimming. He performed his task with a quiet focus. The only sounds were the soft pad of his feet on the wooden boards and the gentle creak of the lanterns as he raised and lowered them. This task gave him a unique perspective on the household. As he moved through the corridors and past the rooms, he saw the evening life of the estate in a series of quiet snapshots. He saw the mistress teaching her son calligraphy by the light of a single lamp, their heads bent together in concentration. He saw 2 of the higher-ranking samurai retainers playing a game of Go, their faces serious as they considered their next move. He saw Hannah, the maid, folding laundry in a quiet corner. Each lantern he lit was like revealing another small scene in a larger play. He was the one bringing the light, making these quiet evening moments possible. He felt a sense of connection to all these people, a silent participant in their lives. He lit the lanterns that illuminated the path to the bathhouse, ensuring the way was safe. He lit the small lamp that stood outside the master's study, a room Kato rarely entered. He could not see inside, but he knew his master was likely in there, reading scrolls or writing letters. The light he provided would fall upon those important pages. The conversation from earlier was still in his thoughts. The order within these walls becomes a sanctuary. As he lit each lamp, he felt the truth of those words. The light was creating a boundary, a circle of warmth and safety in the vast darkness of the night. Each flame was a small act of defiance against the unknown, against the chaos his master had spoken of. He reached the most remote parts of the estate, lighting the lamps in the corridors near the servants' quarters. These lanterns were simpler, more functional, but he lit them with the same care. Every person in the household deserved the comfort and safety of the light. His final task was to light the single stone lantern, the Ishidoro that stood in the center of the Zen garden. This was a special act. This lantern was not just for illumination. It was an aesthetic and spiritual focal point. He stepped onto the stone path of the garden, the cool night air on his face. The sky above was now a deep, velvety black, studded with 1,000 brilliant stars. He knelt before the stone lantern, opened its small paper door, and lit the candle inside. He closed the door and stood back. The light from the stone lantern was a single, steady point of warmth in the cool, dark garden. It illuminated the twisted branches of the ancient pine and cast long, dramatic shadows from the great rocks. It made the garden feel sacred, like a temple under the stars. He stood there for a long moment, watching the flame flicker behind the paper. The world seemed to shrink to this single point of light. It was a fragile thing, a small flame that could be extinguished by a puff of wind. And yet, it was enough. It was enough to hold back the immense darkness of the night. He felt a profound sense of peace. The day had been long, filled with many duties. It had started in darkness, and now it was ending in darkness. But in between, there had been work, purpose, and these small, beautiful moments of light. With his job complete, he extinguished his smoldering rope. His journey with the light was over for the day. He turned and walked back towards the servants' quarters, his own shadow stretching long behind him on the path. The house was now a constellation of soft, warm lights, a haven of peace floating in the sea of night. He had done his part to create that haven. Now, soon, it would be time for his own rest. With the lanterns lit and the evening meal concluded, the final phase of the day began. This was the time for securing the house, for closing it in upon itself, transforming it from an open, living space into a closed, protected fortress for the night. This was a task of great responsibility, ensuring the safety and security of everyone within its walls. Kato worked with a small team of other male servants, each with their designated area. Their movements were practiced and synchronized, a silent drill they performed every evening. Their leader was Kenji, an older, stern servant who had been with the Ishikawa family for decades. Keizo's responsibility was the amadu, the heavy wooden storm shutters. During the day, these shutters were stored in a box at the end of the veranda. Now, it was time to bring them out. They were heavy, made of solid cedar planks. Kaito and another servant worked together, lifting each shutter and sliding it into a track that ran along the outside of the paper shoshi screens. They started at one end of the main house and worked their way around. The sound of the wooden shutters sliding in their grooves was a definitive sound of the end of the day. It was a low, rumbling groan, a sound of the house settling in for a long sleep. Thump. The first shutter was in place, covering a section of the paper screens, blocking the view of the now dark garden. Thump. The next one slid into place beside it. They worked in a steady rhythm, a team that knew its job perfectly. They did not need to speak. A nod, a shared glance, was all the communication they needed. As they closed the shutters, the house transformed. The soft light from the lanterns, which had spilled out onto the verandas, was now contained. The house pulled its light and warmth inward, turning its back on the outside world. From the garden, the house would now look like a solid, dark shape, with only a few faint lines of light showing between the cracks of the shutters. This was a physical manifestation of what Lord Ishikawa had spoken of. They were literally creating a sanctuary, a barrier against the chaos of the outside. The shutters were a defense not just against storms and wind, but against intruders, against the unknown dangers of the night. Kaito felt the weight of the wood in his hands. It was solid, real. This was a practical task, but it felt symbolic. He was closing the door on the day. He was protecting his master, his family, and his fellow servants. The thought gave him strength, and he worked with a focused energy. After all the main verandas were sealed, they moved on to securing the smaller windows and openings. Every potential point of entry had to be checked and locked. They slid heavy wooden bars across the inside of the kitchen doors. They checked the locks on the gates to the inner courtyards. Kenji, the head of the team, moved through the house after them, double-checking their work. His sharp eyes missed nothing. He would test a bar to ensure it was secure, run his hand along the seam between two shutters to make sure there was no gap. His thoroughness was reassuring. It meant that everyone could sleep soundly, knowing that Kenji had made his rounds. While Kaito and the others secured the outer shell of the house, other servants were busy inside. The female servants were preparing the bedding, laying out the futons for the family in their sleeping quarters. The ash in the hearths was being carefully banked for the night, so that a few live embers would remain to start the morning fire. The sounds of the house were changing. The low murmur of conversation quieted. The sounds of activity faded. All that was left was the sound of the house itself, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind against the new wooden shell of the shutters. Kaito's final security task was to walk the perimeter of the main house one last time. He carried a simple wooden clapper. As he walked, he would strike the two pieces of wood together. Clack, clack. The sharp, clear sound echoed in the night. This was the traditional firewatch signal. It served two purposes. It let everyone know that a watchman was on duty, and it would wake them in the unlikely event of a fire. He walked slowly, his senses on high alert. He listened for any unusual sounds. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of a small animal in the bush, these were normal. He listened for the things that did not belong, the snap of a twig under a human foot, a muffled cough. He looked at the shadows, at the dark corners of the courtyards. The lantern light created pools of safety, but the darkness in between was deep. His heart was calm. He was not afraid. This was his home, and he was one of its guardians. As he walked, he felt the cool night air on his cheeks. He looked up at the sky, which was brilliant with stars. The world outside the walls was vast and indifferent. The conflicts of men, the rise and fall of lords, were of no concern to the stars. They simply shone. He thought of his master, likely sleeping now, or perhaps meditating before rest. Lord Ishikawa carried the great burdens of his rank, the worries of politics and war. Kaito's burden was simpler, more immediate, to make sure the shutters were secure, to make sure the fire watch was kept, and he was glad for his simple burden. He could feel the results of his work directly. He could touch the solid wood of the shutters. He could hear the reassuring clack of his wooden clappers. He was a man of simple, tangible duties, in a world of growing uncertainty that felt like a great blessing. He completed his circuit and returned to the servants' quarters. His part in securing the house was done. The night guards, a pair of low-ranking samurai, were now at their posts by the main gate. The house was as safe as human hands could make it. He stood for a moment in the corridor, listening to the deep silence of the sleeping house. It was a silence filled with the quiet breathing of all the souls within it. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of a sanctuary holding fast against the night. Kaito felt a deep contentment. He had done his work. The anchor was holding. The long day, which had begun in the cold darkness before dawn, was now ending in the quiet darkness of night. Kato's duties were finally complete. He made his way back to his own small room in the servants' wing, the same room he had left so many hours ago. The house was asleep, its breath slow and deep. He slid open his paper screen door, the sound impossibly loud in the profound silence. He stepped inside and closed it behind him. His room was a small, empty cube, illuminated only by a faint sliver of moonlight filtering through the small window. It was a simple, stark space, devoid of any personal belongings, except for the clothes he wore. His first action was to retrieve his futon from the cupboard. He unfolded it with the same care he had used to store it in the morning. The familiar motions were comforting, a ritual to bookend his day. He laid the thin mattress and the thick blanket on the tatami mats. It was a humble bed, but to his tired body it was a welcome sight. He undressed, folding his work kimono neatly and placing it beside his pillow. He would wear it again tomorrow. He slipped into a simple cotton sleeping robe. The fabric was soft against his skin. Before lying down, he sat in the formal seiza position in the center of his small room for a few moments. He did not meditate in the way his master did, with a mind trained to seek emptiness. His was a simpler, more direct form of reflection. He closed his eyes and allowed the day to wash over him, not in a rush of thoughts, but as a series of quiet feelings and sensations. He felt the icy cold of the water when he washed the rice. He felt the focused heat of his master's training in the dojo. He felt the warm sun on his back as he raked the garden. He felt the satisfying grit of the sharpening stone against the steel of the knife. He felt the weight of his master's words, the weight of his new understanding. The day had been long and full. It had been, in many ways, just like any other day. A sequence of tasks, a rhythm of work. And yet, it had been different. The conversation with his master had changed something within him. It had given his simple life a new dimension, a new depth. He was not just a servant. He was a keeper of the peace, a guardian of order. He felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for his health, which allowed him to perform his duties. Gratitude for his purpose, for having a clear role in the world. gratitude for the simple beauty he was able to witness each day. The dawn sky, the perfectly cooked rice, the tranquil garden, the glow of a lantern. The winds of conflict were still out there, beyond the walls of the estate. The world was uncertain, but in this small room, at the end of this long day, he felt a sense of profound peace. He had done his work. He had kept his corner of the world in order. That was all he could do, and it was enough. He finally lay down on his futon, pulling the thick blanket up to his chin. The straw of the tatami mats had a clean, grassy smell. The room was cool. He could hear the faint, distant sound of the wind in the pine trees. It was a soothing, ancient sound. He closed his eyes, and his body seemed to sink into the floor, every muscle releasing the tension of the day. Sleep came for him quickly, a gentle tide pulling him out into a dark, dreamless sea. His day was over. The story of this one day was complete. And in that quiet darkness, he knew that one day's story was just a single ripple in a vast, calm sea. The currents of time carry us to new shores, and there are always more quiet histories to discover.